Welcome everybody to another one of Quantum Soul Level 125 Dark Souls 3 PvP builds, and today we are taking a look at quite possibly the most annoying and cringeworthy but yet very effective build that I've ever created. Now before we get started, full disclosure, if you're somebody who's triggered easily by videos that aren't playing Dark Souls the way that you think it needs to be played, you may not want to watch this video because you might not find it enjoyable. But if you're somebody who's not so close-minded, not so triggered as easily, somebody who can actually appreciate some diversity and some unique approaches to the game, hey, stay tuned. You might actually learn something, you might gain some insight from this video or my comments, and that's what my goal is. That's what I hope I can bring to the table. But nonetheless, let's get right into it. So what you're seeing here is an actual hybrid of Luck Faith based around Henry Straight Sword and regeneration. Now that is a mouthful and a lot of different things going on at once, but it actually comes together quite nicely to my surprise. And ironically, this was a build that I was actually going to delete because it was just a pure luck character before, and I said to myself, you know, luck, even with the nerfs and the buffs and whatnot, is still not very good. What is the point of keeping this character around? Let me delete it and make a new character. However, I did have some ideas bouncing around in my head, and I decided to just kind of put some of those pieces together, and what we came out with was an absolute monster, in my opinion. Now, this build, it's not as effective in terms of win rate as some of the other builds that we've taken to the arena. I think our win rate with this one was about 73%. Nonetheless, though, it can be quite effective, especially against high-level players that aren't really prepared for what you're bringing to the table. As you can see in a lot of these matches, we were at significant disadvantages from trades and whatnot in terms of life, but because the spacing was kind of in our favor, where our opponents backed off or we backed off and our opponent didn't rush us down, we were able to regenerate quite a bit of health, and as a result of that, force our opponents to rush us down. And when our opponent is being overly aggressive towards us, we can definitely use that to our advantage and exploit weaknesses in their gameplay for just kind of mindlessly, rage-inducingly running towards us, trying to kill us before we can get some of our healing spells off. So yes, is it cringeworthy? Most likely, but you know what? It's your own fault for giving me that space to cast these miracles. There is a proper way to space your opponent out, and I talk about this a lot in pretty much every weapon and PvP build analysis video that I make, and this is one of the reasons why it is so important, because you don't want to give your opponent the ability to have different options. At this range of space, my opponent can't rush in and punish me effectively, so I can recast all of my miracles that I need to, and as a result, you see we're back up to full health, and our opponent is still at half health. He has absolutely no way to regen his health, so he's at a disadvantage now, and we can go in and continue to fish for our trades and whittle our opponent down and kill him off very, very easily. So, with that being said though, you know, if your opponent is somebody who can space you out properly and you can't actually cast your miracles as easily as you could if your opponent was far away and you had a lot of space between you, how do you want to really set it up so that you are prepared to handle a situation like that? Well, as you can see in this clip, I actually showed you the way that I set things up. I start off with the Lingering Dragon Crest ring in my first ring slot, and I use that to cast the Blessed Weapon and the Bountiful Light, which are the first two miracles that you want to use. Now, Blessed Weapon at our faith, which is 25 faith, is going to regenerate 2 HP per second. And that coupled with Henry Straight Sword, which generates 2 HP per 2 seconds, I believe, because it's 2 HP per tick, and the tick is 2 seconds. So Henry Straight Sword is 2 HP every 2 seconds. Blessed Weapon is 2 HP every 1 second at 25 faith, and Bountiful Light is 7 HP every second. So every second we're at least gaining back 9 HP from Blessed Weapon and Bountiful Light. Now these spells, they do last varying amounts of time based on your faith stat. I think that with the Lingering Dragon Crest ring +2, in this video unfortunately we only had the +1 version, but with the Lingering Dragon Crest ring +2, you can get, I think, up to 60 seconds or very close to 60 seconds worth of buff time with that ring on at 25 faith. So you can definitely rush down your opponent in the beginning, play aggressive, kind of force your opponent back as you take trades, and then as your opponent kind of tries to readjust and gives you that space to kind of recollect themselves and play the neutral game, you can use that opportunity in the matchup to regenerate your health with your third miracle, which is going to be Heal Aid. Now, This is kind of how a lot of the matches we won played out. And in the matches that we lost, in that 73% win rate, the matches that we did lose were to matches where I tried to activate some of the healing miracles at the wrong range, and I was appropriately punished for it. Matches where I tried to parry and failed, and as a result end up taking massive amounts of damage, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more in depth. And other matches where I just was outplayed, straight up just outplayed, because the straight sword wasn't a good matchup for what I was going up against, and it was really a hard struggle. Now, that being said, those aren't excuses. Every time I lose a match, I try to analyze what could I have done better. And sometimes, you know, those things play a big role. Now, because this build is based around Anri's straight sword, yes, the straight sword isn't an all-powerful weapon, even though it's quite top tier. It's not an all-powerful weapon where it just beats everything. However, one of the strengths it definitely has going for it, especially with a build like this, is your ability to mix up the way that you want to play with the straight sword. Like I said, you can play that game where you bait your opponent out to be overly aggressive towards you so that they know they have to close you down very quickly, and you can have a parrying shield in your offhand to maybe parry an opponent if you're into that. I don't really like to parry too much. I know I did one in the beginning of the video, but I did lose, I think, 2 or 3 other matches to missed parries, and the one match I did win when I missed a parry, and I was like, yeah, let's not try parries anymore, just because I'm not so consistent with them. They're not very hard to do, but it's just, you know, sometimes with the inconsistency of parries, I'd rather just play the spacing game. It's what I excel at, in my opinion, so that's why I don't do parries. But you can do it if you want, right? With the straight sword, you do have that option available, and it is a good psychological component to your opponent's like calculation as to how they want to approach you, because if they see a parrying weapon in your offhand, they're likely going to play a little bit more cautious, or they should at least, because they don't want to really get parried and get massively punished for it. So there is that. Of course, you could also go with the high stability shield route, which is what we do for the latter half of the clips and the latter half of our fights in the Fight Club, where you can really play aggressive towards your opponent with that shield, go up to them with the shield up, be ready to take the hits through your shield, and then punish your opponent's rolls or do whatever you want to do. And the nice thing is, you can use the Oak Shield, which does have a native health regeneration built into it, but I actually opted for the Black Knight Shield. And the reason for that is simply because of the better elemental absorption and the higher stability, which does play a big role in my opinion. It is the best shield in the game, in my personal opinion, and it is the shield that you want to use if you're not going for parries, that is, of course. So this is the real flaw that I see with a lot of people making regen builds on YouTube, and I mean, no discredit to them or anything, but just because your build has regen, it doesn't mean that that needs to like be the main crux and focus of the build. Because if all you're focusing on is the regen, you will lose, right? I mean, you need good attacking and defensive options in a PvP fight, and this is why you don't really see me using the Sun Princess Ring or the Blast Fist weapon in my offhand for more regeneration, because like I said, those initial 3 miracles are more than enough regen for this build. As you can see, there was many times where we were able to regenerate our health pretty much back to full health or half health from almost death and come back on our opponents. Here is another perfect example. You can see we are almost dead at this point. We get a good backstab here and we force our opponent to run away, at which time we get a lot of space and we think, well, right away, let's start casting these miracles and get our HP back, force our opponent to rush us down, and look at that. Now the life is even from a massive deficit at the beginning of the fight. We punish our opponent trying to parry there, and now we have the massive advantage. We're casting our Heal Aid, which is the fastest casting healing miracle, which is why you want to use it, even though it doesn't regenerate a lot of HP, and we are using the Saint Tree Bellvine, which has lower than usual spell buff. We don't care about that. We care about the speed, because like I said, you don't want to be punished necessarily for casting your miracles. And one thing that I didn't do, because this build wasn't very optimized in terms of my ring setup, simply because like I said, it was a luck build and I was going to delete it, so I didn't really get all the things I need for this particular respec. But you do want to use the Sage's Ring +2. After you cast your initial spells in the beginning of the fight, which is Blessed Weapon and Bountiful Light, you want to switch out your Lingering Dragon Crest Ring for most likely the Sage's Ring. And the reason for that is because the virtual dexterity that you gain from the Sage Ring +2, coupled with the fastest casting catalyst in the game, which is the Saint Tree Bellvine, will allow you to cast Heal Aid much faster than you see me casting it in these clips from these fights. And that will result in a lot of HP being gained without being punished, because you can cast it so quickly. It will allow you to cast it at more optimized ranges between you and your opponent in terms of space, and still be safe and bait your opponent out, which is even better. I know, another level of mix-up to your game, which is quite unique. So that's kind of how the build breaks down in terms of like its overall miracle and regen aspect. There is a lot more to analyze in terms of how the straight sword is being used, and I didn't really talk about it, but I will do it in part 2, which does utilize, you know, the weapon art skill through the shield and whatnot, which is quite effective. But if you like this video, guys, please leave a like, leave a comment, let me know what you think.